Hello, and welcome back to Parley, the show where you folks support the other stuff I make by paying me monthly to talk about the topic of your choice. And FreeWilliam this month has chosen to have me discuss AI art getting a little bit crazy. Let's not even do the prompt first. This image was made just by AI by putting my logo into it. Look at this image. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's put it away now. We'll come back to that. That's all I need to say. FreeWilliam says, a while back we were having fun with Mid-Journey. It's a image making AI. Recently they had an upgrade, and even casual prompt smithing can give you some surprisingly good results. There's people moving in the direction of videos being made the same way, and you already have the ability to add yourself to the whole process. So other than the sinister aspects, everyone loves getting riled up, what sort of opportunities does this create for creative and artistic people? Free William, for what it's worth, I kind of agree with you that it's maybe we don't need to get so worried. It's not unconcerning, but there's a lot to be not concerned about too, I think. There are a lot of problems with I promise I won't go into them that much, but I do think it's worth mentioning with people kind of faking news, for example. I feel like that's one of the perceived to be the worst things. For what it's worth, I feel like news is pretty fake already. I'm not trying to say there's no the media is lying to you or whatever. I'm just trying to say that things are already pretty focused on manipulating the viewer's perspective. I mean, have you watched the news recently? By the way, I live in the United States. Like either side of the political news spectrum, I don't know. Like there's there's a lot of this is the only possible correct perspective on all sides of human discussion. I don't think that being actually fake changes the underlying motivation. Maybe that isn't as different as as what we currently have, even if it's still bad. For real, I think there's a lot to be excited about. Yeah. Free William, you sent a lot of really cool example images, and I'm gonna try to use them. Now I am gonna have to load them in myself, so I will be changing this image to something else. So thanks for your patience as I do that. I'll leave something up here for a lot of the parlay. Basically I have kind of two categories to discuss. The first one is how having the ability to create an original, pretty unstraightforward, kind of nuanced interpretation of some source image or piece of text is, I think, a really key moment for creators on the internet. The situation was already pretty accessible, all things considered. If you have a smartphone, that's a big ask. But if you have a smartphone, the world over, you basically have a medium tier kit for creating videos of your own. The only thing that you can't easily make is basically like the branding or thumbnail. Now, to make this easier, because platforms know this, a lot of platforms, like to some extent YouTube and TikTok, just as examples, don't have you put a thumbnail, or they kind of default to no thumbnail rather than, normal YouTube upload. The first slot is for you to upload a thumbnail, and then there are some auto-generated thumbnails, which sometimes end up being pretty good. But the norm with YouTube videos formally is to upload a thumbnail. The norm with these shorter form videos is no thumbnail, because these platforms are aware that that is the one part of the process that you have to I don't know exactly how to say this, have a sort of quantifiable skill outside of just being yourself, to make. I can't draw very well. I have a handwriting disorder to some extent. I'm not very good at making things look nice with hand motions. My brain is just weak at that. It's a little bit related to how people have reading difficulties with ordering the letters together. I don't have a problem with that, but I'm told that neurologically this is related. Anyway, I'm a very fast typist. It it's not a big deal, really. When I was younger, it was annoying because, anyway, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, I can't make good images in any easy way. It takes me disproportionately long to make a thumbnail for a video, even if I just need to organize things on a page. I don't really have any experience with that. I don't really know what to do to make it, better or worse or whatever. And another point is that financially, Photoshop, for example, is an expense in what is traditionally a pretty low cost industry. You don't have to pay very much to keep this type of business going. My operating costs are quite low, which is good because I don't get, for example, health insurance. So that just takes the money right back and more in a lot of cases. But it's not like I have physical product I stock. Even creators that do sell merchandise often sell it through a distributor. And so there is a lack of upfront cost that is kind of bucked by the need for images. I've talked to creators before that have said that they felt like a short form series they made, it was so expensive to get the thumbnails made that even though the series was considered a success by everyone that watched it, except for them, because it costs so much just to put art on it, the entire endeavor was undone just by the cost of putting a picture on it. So I know you might be thinking thumbnails are really not that big a deal, but they are, though. Like they really are, though. And in particular, having it be an original image like this is kind of beautiful too. I don't know. That's a huge game changer. That puts you at the point where, as fast as you can have ideas, the only thing that physically could not be made instantly, you can now make instantly. Now, if you can, as fast as you can have a good idea for a video and record that amount of time of you being alive, you can make full featured videos in theory. This is exciting for me because I have an editing process that eliminates the rendering step. It kind of doesn't, but the point is I don't put it in an editor. I set up the stuff I need, and then kind of like controlling the lights and sound at a theater production, I use a Stream Deck, not sponsored, the Elgato product, the Stream Deck. Not sponsored, it's great though. It is really good, I recommend it, but not sponsored. To coordinate that while I talk. And that's how I've made some of my most recent videos. Most people didn't notice. In fact, a few of you, I actually had to re-explain or kind of convince you that indeed it wasn't, edited using a traditional editor. I don't do much editing in my videos anyway. I don't think it's that amazing, but it is a way to remove a part of the process that is unnecessary for people making not editing focused videos. My friend Joey Zero, it's a lot of editing, I don't know if you're going to eliminate that too easily, although he has tried to some extent. But for me, you can use editing to create structure and transitions without using a video editor. You do not need that to add those elements. And adding in the speed of potentially being able to get really nuanced, complete, creatively novel thumbnails without having to really make them is a gigantic game changer for me specifically, me as a creator. For a lot of people, this would be like a convenience where they already haven't done lower hanging fruit to kind of optimize the process. No offense, I just think a lot of people, you could easily improve the way they make videos. But I've kind of already done some of those steps. So for me, this was the most annoying remaining thing, right? FreeWilliam, it's not an exaggeration to say that you showing me this may have changed not just this image, for goodness sakes. Pull up the Zandy series, image 1. As you can see here, we have a swashbuckler wearing a cape, perhaps, or is that a flag back there? I find it very funny that these mostly don't have heads, but they do have the rest of their body. Now, look at my logo while you're on the Pantaloonsulin channel. Go to the Zandy Pants channel and look at that logo and think about that being the source for this image. A lot of it you can kind of see It's a simple logo, and so you can see what the AI did a little bit. This one is pretty normal. It's pants. There's pants in the image. There's an X. It's stylized, but mostly just an X. And then there's a body that's well outside the image. The image doesn't have anything like that. There's a flag, pirate hat-esque thing that's not really a tricorn hat, but it has the feel of one. You can see how that came from there. This one, it's pretty easy to see where it came from. But let's start going, further. So I'm going to order them in a certain way. So here's this one. This one, I almost want to say this is a Warframe thing happening. It kind of feels like maybe the Zandypants logo on the internet is associated often enough with Warframe videos that Warframe looking body type got incorporated into it. I don't know how this AI gets its image set, but I just think that's a weird coincidence. Like, it feels weirdly Warframey. Maybe I'm just noticing that. The head is also, it's not really a head. Why do they all not have heads? Kind of. That's weird. The pants are weirdly detailed. I think that's really interesting. Anyway, so that one's pretty normal, right? But there's a creative novelty, a sort of coming up with genuinely useful ideas where you wouldn't otherwise have. Now, they all have kind of an X motif in the back, but I'm going to start showing you this series. So this one, there is an X in the back, but this is one that gets pretty far away from my direct branding. It's not really recognizable as my branding anymore. And yet it feels weirdly on theme. You know what I mean? It's like close to being something that could feel on brand. This level of novelty, or feeling like you can have an image that has kind of a different interpretation of your branding, is creatively expensive to come up with as a human being. That's a kind of further point I wanted to dig into. It's not just like, oh, cool, you get free, thumbnails or whatever. There's a part of the creative and branding process that is challenging, that this kind of shortcuts a little bit. This is a genuinely novel, I'm not sure what kind of, look at those abs, they're going all over the place. Anyway, not good necessarily, but, in their current form, are these entirely usable? I don't know. I'm going to play around with it myself, believe me, after this parlay is done. But you get what I'm getting at, right? Like, these are on a level where if you could just nudge them a little bit in a certain direction, you're golden. I mean, you have infinite graphic design. That's crazy. It's not very targeted. It probably will continue to be not very targeted for the layperson. But this is the last one I wanted to show you. I like how this one kind of takes the X over the chest that a lot of them had and does something kind of different with it. Like, it's become something else. There's still the X in the back. I don't know, this one, it's just so weird. The head is so... And I really do think there's a Warframe thing going on. Again, I don't know how that AI gets its source material, but I also find it a little interesting that the orange is minimalized in some of them. That's kind of an oddity to me. They're sort of color balanced, except for that last one that had kind of too much orange. But I think that's sort of interesting. They're weirdly easy on the eyes. That's another thing that's odd. I guess I'm just complimenting this AI's artwork. I'm going to put up other images now, just a few others that I have to show you. But I think it's really cool. I think there's a lot to be said for not just the ability to get an image that you have like the rights to or whatever, and we're going to talk about that in a sec, but also the creative injection that having a genuinely novel feeling interpretation of something gives you. The ability to just get somewhat random, but of a high enough quality in general, ideas that feel usable in their current form, or they're very close to being usable, that fascinates me. Now, there is a sort of caveat to all of that. A lot of AI images, let me pull this up again and give you an example, have this thing that I always find really fascinating to look for, almost like a spot the difference or what's wrong with this picture game. Here's some cats with lightsabers that FreeWilliam posted as the first example image, because it's adorable. A lot of the AI images have this weird thing where they have a understanding, because I guess that's the images they're trained on, of sort of the visual flow or what looks normal. And so the framing of a lot of these images feels like weirdly expected in some way, you know? And yet there will be little details where the AI doesn't know what a lightsaber is. So, for example, in the top left one, the two kitties with the green lightsabers crossed, you can see that the caramel kitty on the left has a kind of little lightsaber bit coming out of the bottom, but not quite in the right spot. Like it sort of breaks the illusion a little bit. If only that part wasn't there, you wouldn't focus so much on the lightsaber not like really being descript. And you can see there are some points where the lightsaber is kind of bend a tiny bit, where, you know, that's not, the AI doesn't know what a lightsaber is, but there is that trope or kind of collection of colors. I'm not an expert on this technology, but you get the idea of a super gross oversimplification of what I understand. In the bottom left image, you can see the cat in the center holding a lightsaber. And what's happened is that the AI knows that when there's something that has components that look kind of like that, above it, there is generally a like a blade of light, a lens flare blade. And so you get that pretty reliably, but it just doesn't quite obey the lightsaber rules, you know? A better example of this phenomenon is, I think anyway, this image. In this image, you can see it's a guy sitting with cats, but the more you look, the more it's like wrong in ways you don't immediately notice. It feels like things are kind of in the right place, but then you look closer and they're not. So, for example, the cat in the window is a bird, is a cat. The bird is a cat. I don't know. The room feels kind of slanted, like that's weird, maybe perspective, but the room is kind of slanted. The room in general doesn't really behave right. You can see the slant from the window to the couch is weird. Where the couch is, the perspective is like a little, it doesn't look wrong at first, but if you focus on it more, you start to feel like, where are we? Like, where is the couch? What are we sitting on? The two cats in the foreground, the second cat kind of lower is sort of sleeping in the couch, which if you've had cats, like, all right, maybe, but you see what I mean? Realistically, the AI just kind of didn't care that there was a couch there, and there's just sort of a cat with a cat, and that's the thing. And the cats are watching the thing the man's doing, I guess. The man's hair part is like crazy. Look at that. Like, it doesn't look wrong at first. You see what I'm trying to say? But the more you look at it, the more you feel like, wait, that's actually really weird from a stylistic perspective. The way his pants are, the way his legs are is just sort of wrong. The one leg closer to the foreground is way too thin or at a weird angle, you know? And I'm sure that somebody who actually creates art for a living could point out way more things that just feel off or a little wrong about this. The cat in the background is going to haunt my nightmares, and I also feel like it's kind of floating in midair, like the couch has to be higher and then the floor is lower, and so how... Anyway, you get it. I hope this is a better example of that kind of thing. Let's put this away for a sec. That's sort of hurting my eyes in this weird way. Right. My point is just that it kind of relies on... It doesn't fill all needs very well yet. There's definitely some points at which you have to be doing some solid branding work to begin with to be able to use images that are further generated as something for you to source, I guess. To put it a different way, a lot of these images are theoretically very useful, but you would still need to come up with how they're useful. So it remains a useful tool, quite far away from being an artist in its own right, in my opinion. Because even though I personally really don't care as much as everybody else seems to about like authorship and how art is made, I'm going to get to that in a minute, for the second half. I do think that it matters a lot more than it seems like it does to have I hate using the word brand, but that's the right word, I think. A brand and a kind of softer understanding of that term. Not necessarily something corporate, but there is a story to art and entertainment that I think people value more than it's valuable, but it doesn't not matter at all. So what I mean basically is the why or the impetus or the occasion for the art or the piece of work does matter in a way that you kind of have to establish ahead of time before you'd be able to use this endless waterfall of essentially creative novel images. If you watched, let me give you a few examples. Like my videos, for example, depend rather heavily on there already being a lot of build videos about individual games, builds in individual games. That's the kind of prologue to my channel that I don't have to write. There is that context, but my channel is framed in a way where you're at that point in the story. You know, there's a kind of prologue that needs to be told. There's other examples like Cyberpunk Edge Runners has been sticking in my mind a lot lately. This is if you're not familiar, this is an anime that's in the world of, I'm sure you're familiar with Cyberpunk 2077, the year before the events of the game. And I would treat it as not really a prologue, but sort of a universe introduction, maybe. If you, like me, had no experience with Cyberpunk before this. A lot of people had, because it's a popular RPG as well. But I think that Netflix is a fairly important piece of context for that anime. Cyberpunk Edge Runners is very gory, and you may or may not be aware that Netflix often targets these types of properties that would have difficulty airing on television in some countries, and also gives the studio a better deal. Traditionally, they would get the rights back to their work after a while, whereas in the modern day, often the publisher or whoever pays upfront and kind of gets the property permanently. So if it does do well or it gets popular over time, that doesn't come back to benefit the studio. Netflix has been giving the studios the old deal, where after a while the rights default back to the studio. That's my understanding of the situation. And so a lot of these very creatively rich, Cyberpunk Edge Runners has awesome animation for the most part. Studio Trigger, again, what would you expect, I guess, but is also graphic, which is something that you would come to expect, even if you didn't know what I just told you, having watched similar properties on Netflix, because they're kind of targeting those a little bit. I would say that previous examples of that happening, which would be The Beginning, is an anime that I don't recommend, but maybe you should watch the beginning of it if you're really interested in this topic. It's not like atrocious, it's just kind of boring. You could watch a few episodes of it. You'll see that it is a very pretty, like really high production value, moderately graphic, but overall pretty whatever show. Yeah, at least that's what I thought. Maybe you'll really like it. It can't hurt. Love, Sex, and Robots, is that what it's called? Love, Death, and Robots? Maybe get your mind out of the gutter is happening here. That something robots, that mini series is also an example of like an earlier in time, tamer example of this type of animator Netflix thing that I believe has created a perspective in which Cyberpunk Edge Runners gore and violence and sexual content isn't as surprising. I'm going on at this point for a little bit too long compared to how useful this example is. My point is just that I feel like that type of perspective is still really useful. The biggest thing that is not useful, to put it a different way, about like this image, or specifically stuff like this image, is this has no real perspective. It doesn't come from anywhere. Now, I think a lot of people, what I'm going to spend the rest of the Parley talking about, a lot of people care more than I think it's really valuable about how art is made, or the process of art being kind of impressive. I'm going to be very critical of that in a minute. But before I do that, I want to note that it has another value that I think people often overlook. It makes it kind of human comprehensible. It gets out of the way the desire to figure out why a thing is there, I guess. I wonder if the advent of AI art like this being a really cheap and still really creatively fascinating way to, put an image on your piece of work, where that would be sort of the odd element out, like I talked about at the beginning of this. I wonder if that getting more popular will make people less confused by the apparent randomness of images like this. Because if that happened, that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. That would increase the value of this, basically just people using it. At the moment, it could improve not at all, and over the next few years, it will become more useful simply because people will be more used to seeing images like this, which is a little sad because the amazingness of them will wear off a little bit. But for real, this is crazy. Anyway, right. So yeah, I think that finishes that first biggest point, most of what I wanted to talk about, which is that the kind of context for these images is important, or the prologue to using art like this. And because these are so random a lot of the time, that does remove a little bit of utility that they will probably gain back over time. I just think that's noteworthy. At the moment, I think using these would be so confusing to some viewers that it might almost backfire in some cases. They might be seen as an oddity, but it might just seem so unexpected or not what the viewer had been made to expect that they might be less inclined to check out your thing, Okay, so for the second part, I kind of want to talk about this specifically. I might make this bigger in a sec. And I want to get into this topic of ownership, or this being a bridge to AI art, and how people have this fetish for how things are made. Okay, so if you go to a museum, I dated someone when I was younger that was very into museums. She worked at a museum, and it was a very famous museum that shall remain nameless, but if you know I live in the northeastern United States, you get the idea. There are some pretty famous museums in this area. It was a big deal museum, the going to Harvard of working at a museum, if you will. I don't really care about that stuff, but she did, and it was a great job. Just because I don't find it particularly impressive doesn't mean that's not awesome. And so, of course, I went to that museum quite a bit, even though, to be honest with you, I'm not the biggest fan of museums. I still had an okay time. I learned a lot, mostly about the weird ways people go to museums. We would go to modern art sections that have, okay, so if you've been around in a museum a lot, you've seen those pieces of art that are to the untrained eye anyway, it's just some red paint, some yellow paint, a chunk of blue paint, and not even particularly chaotically organized. And to a lot of casual observers, it's like, why? Like, why is that valuable to anyone? Which I'm, by the way, when I say casual observers, it's totally talking about myself too. But a lot of people really go on about how they really appreciate that piece. And I'm not using that as a way to deprecate that type of work because I don't understand it. Maybe it's really interesting and I just don't get it. My point is simply that if you look at that and then you start going to the other pieces of work, you'll notice that kind of doesn't change. For a lot of people, no still image has real impact until usually what happens is somebody kind of tells them the story of the piece, or the piece already has a story, like the Mona Lisa. It's the one Mona Lisa. No one is looking at the picture. I mean, I am. I think there's stuff to see in the picture. But the people there taking pictures are taking pictures of themselves behind the camera, not in the image, but implied to be present at the site of the real Mona Lisa. You see what I mean? It's a story, not the piece of art. I think that most people in museums don't actually spend any time looking at art exactly. They're kind of just experiencing stories. By the way, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, in my opinion, for what it's worth. I just feel like it's a misunderstanding of what maybe someone was trying to do. I don't think museums are very effective. Maybe I could say it that way. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think that AI artists, fully functional, would have to add a lot more features. We kind of talked about this in part one. An artist, maybe with an identified name, maybe a personality that is an AI and not a human, will probably be biased against pretty heavily by some people because it isn't a human who did the process of making their piece of art. To a lot of people, that's all art is. Like there is no picture. It's just kind of that process. And so to skip that process, a lot of people, in my view, really overly value work for its own sake. If you could make something amazing looking effortlessly, it's not a virtue to have bled for that piece of artwork. People treat it like it is, but I'm telling you, I'm dying on the hill of it's not. I think that that's because people don't get the piece of artwork. And so the only way they can kind of engage with that piece is if there is a human story that piece then represents. And I personally don't value that. Now, this is an artistic taste thing, by the way. I'm giving this strong opinion because I'm inviting you to disagree or form your own opinion about it. I want everyone to form their own opinions about this. Because if I'm so right, then you'll all eventually agree with me. I don't know. It's fine. Think whatever you want. This is my modus operandi for most things I do, actually. I don't mind if you disagree. I do think that people will trend toward this direction. We'll see. My point is that perception of art, it seems to me like that's a real problem for AI art. It really makes it not art to most people for a reason they won't put into words, because that would be to admit that they do not understand. And if there's one thing we know from social pressure in human society, it's that people will do anything to not admit that they don't understand. That's really toxic and bad, but it is true. And so personally, I'm pretty confident that there will be this sort of unspoken, nebulous, verbal resistance to AI art, but it will be popular because privately the images look cool, right? There is this element where they are novel, like they are visually interesting. And to a lot of people, they already don't have any particular way of interpreting images. So something striking or weird or unexpected is king in that environment. Like that will win over other examples. I feel like this type of AI image is particularly primed to be successful in a kind of meme-based culture that I kind of hope is just a phase for humanity, but whatever. This kind of obsession with the lol so random approach to making things. It can be fun when things just come out of nowhere, don't get me wrong. But I do think that people are a little too into, it kind of feels like people are growing out of this a little bit. I don't know. What do you think? To this feeling of it's so unprompted to do or make or say this. And that's spontaneously funny to a lot of people. Or again, my hope is that it's true that people are kind of growing out of this, but early 2000s meme culture had a lot of this. Again, I would word it as the lol so random school of humor. And personally, I feel like memes have taken a turn toward relatively more context, or being memes about memes, which is context, I guess. And so hopefully we'll just grow out of that. But my point is that things not having a story actually has gained a lot of ground, in my opinion, where previously a lot of people's interaction with a piece of entertainment was it had to have a story, because nobody without a story had the resources to make a piece of entertainment. But now everyone, well, everybody with the access to the thing has the resources to make a piece of entertainment. So I wonder, basically, I just wanted to conclude this by talking about, if you can't tell, I'm very interested in this topic. I hope this is close enough to answering your parlay, FreeWilliam. I wonder, there's two really big influences on the reception of a lot of AI-made art that I'm very curious to see how they'll land. The first one I tried to detail is this idea that I think most people actually don't engage with most art at all, and it's really just the story behind the piece of work, which means that portrayed in a museum, for example, I think a lot of people will verbally bounce off those pieces of work while privately acknowledging that they are just cool, and I think that makes them good in some way. Contrasting that, I do think that a lot of modern meme culture or just internet culture in general has, to some extent, favored or created the rise of media that doesn't have a story, or pieces of art or entertainment that don't have a story, which I really like because I never thought that was valuable. And so I'm curious if the sort of AI art trend will take one or both of those things, and whether that will define it to some extent. I feel like this is a closing thought I should include. It's in my notes for this parlay, but I don't really have that much to say about it. I just, yeah, we should include it. There's obviously a separate parlay about whether the process is meaningful, whether the story should or is meaningful, should be meaningful. A classic college lecture question is, if you didn't know this was a famous piece of work, would you think it was good? And my philosophy has always been, if you don't think it's good without knowing its story, it's not good. Finding out that it was made in 10 hours while the artist was drunk doesn't make it good. Like, that's an interesting story. People have an experience where they're like, no, I think it does make it good. No, I think you're having an experience where you think that story is good. And there's also a nice picture there. You don't magically think the picture is better. I don't think. The picture just evokes that story being satisfying. And really, they're not even good stories. They're just inspiring for a lot of people, I guess. But I don't value hard work. I value interesting work. And so when I hear somebody like did all this work, I think, what an idiot. Why didn't they think of a more efficient way to do that? Whereas I think most people don't think of more efficient ways to do things. And now I'm just ranting at you, but I think this should be in the parlay. And so they think, wow, what if I worked that much? That would take a lot of work or whatever. I don't know. Because they see that as, I guess, the only way or the default way. I don't know. Like, to me, it's weird and a bit alien, a bit alienating for me. How much people value work for its own sake, basically. You work to your detriment is what I would say, is it feels like people value, which is honestly a little disgusting to me, which is why I like these images so much. But the thing I wanted to include in this parlay, and I will make this bigger for a sec, actually, cover my face a bit. The context for a piece of work is kind of meaningful, I argued toward the beginning of the parlay. So while the story behind it, I don't know, I've always felt like people kind of fetishized. There being some context is useful. So, for example, I think that this image is really remarkable, but the reason isn't because of anything in this specific image. It's just because imagine if this had a purpose or a direction. This is a detailed anatomical or structural model of an organism, I guess, that doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. Imagine how incredibly detailed you could make a thing nearly instantly. The programs actually take a while to make these images. We should give them credit where credit's due. It takes some work, computational work. You could just have God be. Look at the top right image. It's the God. This is God be. That is what this is. Guild Le Bleu? Is that what the bottom left one is? Guild Le Bleu? Anyway, we're not going to try to figure that out too much. But to me, like, the remarkable thing about that is that you can make an image like that in a somewhat automated way. The image itself, you see what I mean? Like, it's still sort of the story, and even then it would need kind of some framing to be more significant, for that to be part of a world that was consistent with other images. That's what would make that amazing instead of just a tech demo. I mean, it's still pretty amazing, in my opinion. But yeah, I don't know. I just think that's worthwhile. Some way to sort of coordinate that ability. possibly a way to take the ability to make images like that and decouple it from relative randomness is, in my mind, more meaningful. I really thought it was interesting, and I took a lot of time in this parlay showing you this because I thought it was really meaningful. Seeing not just one image of the AI doing something with the Zandy logo, and I didn't include all of them, by the way. There's a few more that I just didn't have as much to say about. One of them had a woman's-ish head. Another one just had a really big X and like more of a pronounced collar. It was more of a pronounced human form. I just didn't have as much to say about these, so I didn't put them up. But them being part of a series where you can see, okay, the AI did this, but what would it do if you did it like 5 more times? It would all be the same. Oh, it's kind of not all the same. It's a little bit the same, but like that feels much more meaningful to me. You could have a whole channel that somehow got that aesthetic to work for it. There's a lot more united images that you could imagine having a whole series of these. And because they do feel like they kind of link up and they're internally consistent in some way, that's the dynamite in some way. There is a magic to that. Like an entire world has been created. That feels like there's intention there. And I think that because these AI images eliminate the process in the way that people often get distracted by, let's say it that way, instead of my incredibly rude way of saying it for this whole parlay, that people just fetishize it and they don't ever look at the actual art. People maybe get distracted by how it was made. But then if you see something that it feels like there was this whole process, but there just wasn't this whole process, that to me is much more interesting. It makes me feel like now you need to engage and figure out what could the storyline be, basically. And I would go so far as to say a lot of art that people get distracted by the story of, the artist was hoping that you would come up with your own thoughts about it. And yet you got distracted. I'm not talking to FreeWilliam, any of you. And yet people got distracted by the artist's ideas of it. When nothing would make a lot of artists happier than if you had your own idea about the piece of work. So work for which there is no initial idea, like that is very exciting. It could either be your idea, you could use it for your own purposes, and that could be useful. Or again, I think that it could be uniquely artful or an effective way to enjoy art in some way, maybe better. The final thing I want to include before I go is very simple. Again, you could do a whole other thing about, is the process meaningful? I'm suggesting here that there's some value in there being no process. The very fact that there isn't a process, or a recognizable human process, is, I argue, actually an asset to a lot of these pieces of art. But you could do an entire separate parlay as well on, we don't have time for it here, basically whether human work will be valued in a world with AI art that feels internally cohesive in some way, that feels like it's just humans making art, but it's faster, basically. Will people value human art? I think they will. I've never really been that worried about that. I'm not going to leave you in suspense about what I think about that. But why, or trying to kind of unpack, but will people still value that? I don't know. I mean, I think that the key difference is this sort of story behind it, or the human experience that is relatable. And the question comes down to, the hinging point is, are people going to end up being more interested in interpreting art when something is kind of out of their way and there's just the art, and they're left to wonder why is this existing? What? Or are people going to get attached to that human experience part? Is art actually that interesting to most people? And the answer is, in my opinion, probably no, which is why human art will still be interesting to people. Although I don't think it will be because of the art. I think it will be because of the human story behind the piece of work. But that's by the by. Anyway, that I could do a whole thing about that. That's my short answer for now. I think that's important. I liked this topic. I care a lot about this. Some of my first videos included AI music as a way to include music that I felt I needed because I was a new self-conscious creator, without needing to pay for it because I had no money. I don't know how I feel about not needing to pay for some of these things and the licensing for some of these things. That's a whole separate topic as well. It's a huge topic, obviously. FreeWilliam, you'll forgive me, you left it pretty open-ended, so I hope that I gave you some interesting topics to go off of. Thanks to the cool parlay, but also really inspiring images based on my own logo. That is useful. I'm working on some branding stuff right now, and this was genuinely creatively valuable. I'm looking forward to perhaps employing this in some way.